The bullet had come so close that Jennings felt the heat of it sear past her cheek before it buried itself in the pine tree behind her. And in that frozen moment of understanding, she knew her solitary life in these Wyoming mountains was about to change forever. She dropped flat against the rocky ground, her rifle already in her hands before her mind fully processed the danger. 7 years of living alone on this mountain had honed her instincts to a razor's edge. Another shot rang out, then another, the reports echoing through the canyon below her cabin. But these shots were not aimed at her. Someone down there was in trouble. Jane pressed herself against the cold earth, listening. The mountains had taught her patience, taught her to read the silences between sounds. Men's voices drifted up, harsh and mocking. Then a single voice, steady despite obvious pain, telling them they would not take his horse, not take his supplies, and certainly not take his life without a fight. She should stay hidden, should let whatever was happening down there play out without her involvement. That was how she had survived these 7 years since she had fled civilization and its cruelties. But something in that lone voice, that stubborn refusal to yield even when outnumbered, stirred something in her chest that she thought had died long ago. Moving silently through the pines, Jane worked her way down the slope toward the commotion. Through the trees, she could see them now. 3 men with guns drawn, circling a 4th man who knelt beside his fallen horse. The animal had been shot, its flanks heaving with labored breaths. The man's hand rested on the horse's neck, and even from this distance, Jane could see the grief in the gesture. "Should have just handed over your goods when we asked nice," one of the bandits said, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "Now you have lost your horse, and you are about to lose a whole lot more." The kneeling man looked up, and Jane caught a glimpse of his face. Young, maybe late 20s, with dark hair and eyes that held no fear despite his situation. Blood stained his shirt sleeve where a bullet had grazed him. "You shot an innocent animal because you are too lazy to earn your own way," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the mountain air. "That makes you lower than anything that crawls in the dirt." The bandit raised his pistol, aiming at the man's head. Jane did not think. She simply acted. Her rifle shot cracked through the morning air, and the gun flew from the bandit's hand, his finger likely broken from the impact of her bullet. He howled, clutching his hand to his chest. "Next one goes through something you cannot live without," Jane called out, working the lever action smoothly and sighting down at the 3 men. "Mount up and ride out, now." The bandit spun, searching for her position in the trees. She had chosen her spot well, concealed behind a fallen log with clear sightlines to all 3 men. "This is not your concern, friend," another bandit said, his hand hovering near his holstered weapon. "We have business with this man." "Your business just ended," Jane replied. "You have 3 seconds before I decide you are too much trouble to leave breathing." The injured bandit was already backing toward the horses they had left tied some distance away. "Come on," he said to his companions. "One person with a rifle up high, we cannot win this." The other 2 hesitated, clearly not wanting to leave without their prize. Jane fired again, close enough to the second man's boot that dust kicked up over his foot. 2 seconds, she said flatly. They went. Within moments, the sound of hoofbeats faded down the mountain and silence returned. Jane remained in position, waiting to ensure they would not circle back. The man below stayed kneeling beside his horse, murmuring soft words to the dying animal. After several long minutes, Jane finally rose and worked her way down the slope. The man heard her approach but did not reach for his weapon. He simply continued stroking his horse's neck, his face drawn with sorrow. "She was a good horse," he said quietly as Jane approached. "Name was Maple on account of her color. Had her for 5 years." Never once spooked at gunfire, never threw me, never gave me a moment of trouble. Jane could see the light fading from the horse's eyes. The animal had maybe minutes left. She knelt on the other side, running her hand along the horse's shoulder. "She carried you well," Jane said. It was not much, but grief needed acknowledgement, and she could see this man truly cared for his animal. "I should not have stopped in that clearing," the man said. "Should have kept going, but she was tired and I thought we could rest. My fault, she is dying." "The fault belongs to the men who pulled the triggers," Jane replied. "Do not carry blame that is not yours." He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw surprise register in his eyes. He had expected another man, not a woman in worn buckskins with her dark hair braided down her back, her face weathered from years of mountain sun and wind. "You saved my life," he said. "I am grateful, though I am sorry you had to waste your time on my foolishness." "Stopping to rest is not foolishness," Jane said. The horse shuddered, a long exhale escaping. "She is going now. Talk to her." The man leaned close to the horse's ear, speaking words too soft for Jane to hear. Within moments, Maple was gone, her eyes glazing over, her body still. The man sat back on his heels, wiping at his eyes without shame. "I am Dalton Sullivan," he said after a moment. "From Montana originally, though I have been traveling for the better part of a year." "Jane Jennings," she replied. "This is my mountain." "I am grateful you were here, Miss Jennings." He looked down at his horse, then at his scattered supplies where the bandits had torn through his pack. "I suppose I will be walking from here on." Jane studied him. He was injured, though not badly. His supplies were scattered but mostly intact. But without a horse in these mountains, his chances of making it to the nearest town were slim. Autumn was coming on fast and the nights already carried frost. "Where were you headed?" she asked. "Anywhere, really," Dalton said with a slight, sad smile. "I have been traveling since my parents died last winter. Farm could not sustain itself without them, so I sold what I could and took to wandering. Thought I might find work somewhere, find a new purpose." He gestured at his dead horse. "Seems the mountains had other ideas." Jane should send him on his way, should point him toward the trail to the nearest settlement and wish him well. That was what 7 years of solitude had taught her. Keep to yourself, trust no one, need no one, but she found herself saying, "My cabin is a mile up. You can rest there, tend that arm. I will help you bury your horse come morning." Dalton looked at her with such genuine surprise that she almost took the offer back. "I could not impose on you like that, Miss Jennings. You have already done more than enough. You will not make it to town before dark," Jane said practically. "And those men might come back with friends. Better to be somewhere defensible." She stood, shouldering her rifle. Dalton climbed slowly to his feet, favoring his left side. The bullet graze on his arm was still bleeding, she noticed. "Bring what supplies you can carry," Jane said. "Leave the saddle. We can retrieve it tomorrow." They worked in silence, gathering his scattered belongings. Dalton moved carefully, pain evident in every motion, but he did not complain. Jane found herself approving of that. She had little patience for people who made their suffering everyone else's problem. The walk to her cabin took longer than usual, with Dalton injured and carrying his pack. Jane kept her rifle ready, her senses alert for any sign of the bandits returning. But the forest remained quiet save for the rustling of wind through pine needles and the distant call of a hawk. Her cabin came into view as they crested a small rise. It was a solid structure, built with her own hands from the timber around her. Not large, just one main room with a sleeping loft, but it had a good stone fireplace, a sturdy roof, and walls that kept out the wind. A small barn stood nearby, empty now save for supplies and firewood. "You built this yourself?" Dalton asked, genuine admiration in his voice. Had help from a trapper the first year, Jane admitted. He taught me the basics, then moved on. I have maintained it since. Inside, the cabin was spare but functional. A table and 2 chairs, though one chair had not been sat in for years. Shelves held preserved foods, dried herbs, and the few books she owned. Her rifle rack held 2 other firearms besides the one she carried. A Dutch oven hung in the fireplace, and various pots and pans dangled from hooks on the walls. "Sit," Jane instructed, pointing to a chair by the table. She moved to her supply shelf, pulling down a tin of salve and clean cloth for bandaging. "Let me see that arm." Dalton shrugged out of his jacket and rolled up his sleeve. The bullet had carved a groove through the meat of his upper arm, painful but not deep. Jane cleaned it with water from her kettle, noting how he tensed but did not pull away. "You have done this before," he observed, watching her work. "Lived alone in the mountains for 7 years, Jane said. "You learn to tend your own wounds or you do not survive." 7 years is a long time to be alone, Dalton said quietly. "If you do not mind my asking what brought you up here." Jane paused in her bandaging, old pain flickering through her chest. "I do mind," she said flatly. "My past is my own business." "Of course," Dalton said quickly. "I apologize. I had no right to ask." She finished wrapping his arm in silence, tying off the bandage with efficient movements. When she stepped back, Dalton flexed his arm carefully, testing the wrapping. "You have skill with this," he said. "Thank you." Jane busied herself with stoking the fire, uncomfortable with his gratitude. She was not accustomed to conversation, to having another person in her space. It made her feel oddly exposed, as if he could see through her carefully constructed walls simply by being present. "You can sleep in the loft," she said. "I will take the main room. Come morning, we will bury your horse and I will point you toward the trail to town." "You are generous," Dalton said. "More generous than I deserve, given that I am a stranger who brought trouble to your mountain." "You did not bring trouble. Trouble found you," Jane replied. "There is a difference." She prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork, working in silence while Dalton sat at the table, his eyes taking in her home. She could feel his curiosity, but appreciated that he asked no more personal questions. They ate without much conversation, the silence comfortable enough. As darkness fell fully, Jane showed him to the loft and gave him a blanket from her stores. Then she banked the fire and settled into her own bedroll near the hearth, her rifle close at hand. Old habits died hard, and she would not sleep truly deeply with a stranger in her home, no matter how grateful he seemed. But as she lay in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of her cabin settling, she found herself wondering about this Dalton Sullivan. He had faced death with dignity, grieved his horse with genuine feeling, and thanked her for her help without false bravado. In her experience, such qualities were rare in men, not that it mattered. Come morning, he would be on his way, and her life would return to its familiar solitude. That was how it needed to be, how it had to be. Dawn came with golden light streaming through her windows. Jane woke to find Dalton already up, sitting on the edge of the loft with his legs dangling down, looking out the small window at the mountains beyond. "Could not sleep?" she asked, rising from her bedroll. "Slept fine," Dalton replied, climbing carefully down the ladder. "Just woke early." Habit from farm life. The dawn is beautiful here, though. Can see for miles. Jane prepared coffee and breakfast, aware of Dalton's eyes following her movements. Not in a threatening way, she realized, but with genuine interest, as if he found her fascinating. It made her uncomfortable and oddly pleased at the same time. "We should bury your horse soon," Jane said as they ate, "before the predators find her." They walked back down to where Maple lay, the morning mist still clinging to the ground. Jane had brought shovels from her barn, and they worked together to dig a grave in a clearing where the soil was softer. It was hard work, and Dalton's injured arm clearly pained him, but he insisted on doing his share. When the grave was deep enough, they dragged Maple's body into it with ropes. Dalton stood for a long moment, looking down at the horse that had carried him so faithfully. "Thank you, girl," he said softly. "Rest easy now." They filled in the grave, piling rocks on top to keep scavengers from digging it up. When it was done, Dalton stood looking at the mound for several long minutes, saying nothing. "She mattered," Jane said quietly. "That is clear." "Everything should matter," Dalton replied. "That is what my mother used to say. Everything and everyone has value if we just take the time to see it." He looked at Jane. "She would have liked you, I think. She always admired strength in women." Jane felt heat rise to her cheeks and turned away, uncomfortable with the compliment. "We should get your saddle and gear, then I will show you the trail to town." They retrieved his saddle and the few items they had left behind. As they walked back toward her cabin, Dalton moving more stiffly now that the work had aggravated his injury, Jane found herself slowing her pace to match his. Back at the cabin, she pointed out the trail that would lead him down the mountain toward the nearest settlement, a small town called Monticello about 20 miles distant. "Follow the stream down," she instructed. "It will take you most of the day on foot, but you should make it before nightfall if you keep a steady pace. The people there are decent enough. You can probably find work if you need it." Dalton looked at the trail, then back at her cabin, then at her. Something worked in his expression, a decision forming. "What if I did not go?" he said. Jane felt her entire body go still. "What? What if I stayed?" Dalton said, the words coming faster now as if he had been thinking about this all morning. "You have a barn with no animals, fields that could be worked. I am strong, I know farming and building, I could help you." "I do not need help," Jane said sharply. "I have managed fine on my own." "I know you have," Dalton said. "I can see that, but maybe it is not about need. Maybe it is about what could be better." "I do not want company," Jane said, feeling panic rise in her chest. This was exactly what she had feared, what she had avoided for 7 years. "I came to this mountain to be alone." "Why?" Dalton asked, not challenging but genuinely curious. "What hurt you so badly that you had to run this far?" "That is none of your concern," Jane snapped. "I saved your life. I gave you shelter and food. I am giving you directions to safety. That is all I owe you. Now go." Dalton stood his ground, his dark eyes steady on hers. "You are right. You owe me nothing. But I am not asking because I think you owe me. I am asking because in the day I have spent here, I have seen something I have been searching for this whole year of traveling. Purpose. A place to build something. A person worth knowing." "You do not know me," Jane said, her voice shaking now. "You do not know what I have done, what I have run from." "Then tell me," Dalton said simply. "Or do not. I do not care about your past, Jane. I care about right now, this moment, and whether you are going to send me away because you truly want me gone or because you are afraid." Jane wanted to rage at him, to order him off her mountain, but the words caught in her throat because he was right. She was afraid. Afraid of letting someone close, afraid of being hurt again, afraid of caring about someone and having them leave or worse. "My husband used to beat me," she heard herself say, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "For 3 years he beat me for every small thing. Dinner too cold, house not clean enough, my voice too loud or too quiet, or just because he had a bad day. I tried to leave twice. He found me both times, dragged me back, made it worse." Dalton's expression darkened with anger, but he said nothing, simply listened. "The last time he broke my arm," Jane continued, the memories she had buried rising up like bile. "Broke it so badly I thought I might lose it. While I lay there on the floor, he told me he would kill me if I ever tried to leave again. Told me I was his property and I would die his property. What happened to him? Dalton asked quietly. I killed him, Jane said flatly. Waited until he was drunk and asleep, took his gun and put a bullet through his head. Then I took what money we had and ran. Ran until I found these mountains, found this place where no one could find me. That was 7 years ago. I was 20 years old. The silence stretched between them. Jane waited for the judgment, the disgust, the fear. Instead, Dalton stepped closer. He deserved worse, Dalton said, his voice hard. And you deserved better. You deserve better still. Jane felt tears stinging her eyes, angry at herself for showing such weakness. I do not deserve anything. I am a murderer. I took a life, regardless of the reason. You survived, Dalton corrected. You protected yourself when no one else would. That is not murder, Jane. That is survival. The law would not see it that way, Jane said bitterly. If anyone ever found out, I would hang. Then we will make sure no one finds out, Dalton said. I meant what I said. I do not care about your past. I care about who you are now, the woman who built a life from nothing, who lives by her own skill and will, who saved my life without hesitation. That is the person I see. Jane looked at him, this strange man who had stumbled into her carefully ordered solitude. Why would you want to stay here knowing what I am? Because of what you are, Dalton said. Strong, capable, honest enough to tell me a truth that could destroy you if I proved unworthy of it. He paused. And because I am tired of wandering, tired of being alone. Tired of feeling like nothing I do matters. Here with you I could matter, we could matter. I do not know how to trust anyone, Jane said, her voice barely a whisper. I do not know if I can. Then let me earn it, Dalton said. Give me 1 month. Let me stay. Let me help. Let me prove that I am not like the man who hurt you. If at the end of that month you want me gone, I will go, no arguments. Jane knew she should refuse. Should send him away now, before she started to care, before she let herself hope that maybe life could be something other than solitary survival. But there was something in his eyes, a sincerity she had not seen in another person for so long she had almost forgotten it existed. 1 month, she said finally. You sleep in the barn, you pull your weight, you follow my rules, and if I say go, you go immediately. Understood, understood, Dalton said, a smile breaking across his face that transformed him from handsome to beautiful. You will not regret this, Jane. I promise you that. I already regret it, Jane muttered, but there was no heat in her words. They spent the rest of the day organizing the barn for Dalton to sleep in. It had a small room at the back where Jane had occasionally sheltered animals during particularly harsh weather. With a thorough cleaning, some fresh straw and a blanket, it became a decent enough sleeping space. Dalton insisted on doing most of the work despite his injury, and Jane found herself impressed by his determination. He did not complain about the accommodations, did not make demands, simply set about making the space livable with efficient movements. I will need to make a trip to town, Dalton said as they finished. I have a bit of money still. I can buy supplies, maybe a horse if I can find one cheap enough. Not yet, Jane said. Your arm needs to heal and those bandits might be watching the trails. Give it a week or two. You are probably right, Dalton agreed, though I hate being a burden on your supplies. I have enough for 2 for a while, Jane said. I keep my stores well stocked. That evening they shared another simple meal. This time, the silence felt less awkward, more companionable. After they ate, Dalton offered to wash the dishes, and Jane let him, watching as he worked with careful attention to doing the job properly. My mother taught me to respect the work that goes into keeping a home, Dalton said, noticing her watching. She said any man who thought cleaning and cooking were beneath him was not worth his salt. She sounds like she was a wise woman, Jane said. She was, Dalton agreed, a note of sadness in his voice. Lost her to fever last winter. My father followed a week later. I think his heart just gave out from grief. They were married 30 years, loved each other every day of it. That must have been something to see, Jane said quietly. It was, Dalton said. Made me believe that kind of love was possible, that two people could choose each other and keep choosing each other through everything life threw at them. Jane felt an ache in her chest at his words. She had never known that kind of love. Her marriage had been arranged by her father to settle a debt, handed over to a man she barely knew who turned out to be a monster. The idea that marriage could be about choice, about love, seemed almost foreign. As night fell, Dalton headed to the barn with his blanket while Jane settled into her usual spot by the fire. But sleep did not come easily. She kept thinking about what she had done, letting this stranger stay. Kept wondering if she had made a terrible mistake or if, somehow, this might be the beginning of something better. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Dalton proved true to his word, working hard despite his healing injury. He chopped firewood, repaired sections of fencing that Jane had been meaning to fix, helped her harvest the vegetables from her small garden before the frost came. They worked mostly in silence those first few days, both of them feeling out this new arrangement. But gradually, conversation began to flow more easily. Dalton told her stories about growing up on his family farm, about his parents and the life they had built. Jane found herself sharing small pieces of her own childhood, the good memories from before her father's debts had forced her into marriage. "You never talk about your mother," Dalton observed one afternoon as they worked together to shore up the barn roof. "She died when I was 12, Jane said, holding a board steady while Dalton hammered. "Pneumonia. After she was gone, my father sort of fell apart, started drinking, started gambling. Within 3 years, he owed more money than he could ever repay." "So he sold you," Dalton said, his voice hard. "He called it marriage," Jane said, "made it sound like he was securing my future. I was too young to understand what was really happening until it was too late." "How old were you?" 17, Jane said. "My husband was 35. Dalton's jaw clenched, but he kept hammering, working out his anger through physical labor. Jane appreciated that. She did not want sympathy or pity. She just wanted to be heard, to have someone acknowledge what had been done to her. "You deserved better," Dalton said after a while. "You deserved to choose your own path." "Well, I am choosing now," Jane said, "and my path is here on this mountain, answering to no one." "Except maybe to yourself," Dalton said with a slight smile. "That is still answering to someone." Jane found herself smiling back before she could stop herself. "I suppose that is true enough." As the week progressed, Jane noticed herself beginning to relax around Dalton. He kept his distance, respected her space, never made her feel threatened or uncomfortable. When they worked together, he listened to her instructions without arguing, but also offered suggestions when he had experience with a particular task. More surprisingly, Jane found herself looking forward to their evening meals together, to the conversations that ranged from practical matters to deeper subjects. Dalton had read widely despite his farm upbringing, and he loved to discuss the books he had encountered. "What do you read?" he asked one evening, gesturing to the small shelf of books in her cabin. "Medical texts mostly," Jane said, "and some poetry, one of the books about plants and herbs for healing." "Poetry?" Dalton's eyebrows rose with interest. "Would not have expected that. Why not?" Jane asked, feeling slightly defensive. "No reason it does not suit you," Dalton said quickly. "Just interesting." "What kind?" Jane pulled down a worn volume from her shelf. "Whitman. A trapper left it behind years ago. I have read it so many times the pages are falling out." "Song of Myself," Dalton said, recognizing the book. "I celebrate myself and sing myself and what I assume you shall assume." "You know it." Jane could not keep the surprise from her voice. "My mother loved Whitman," Dalton said. "She used to read to me in the evenings." Said his words made her feel like being human was something vast and beautiful, not small and mean. They spent the rest of the evening trading favorite passages, Jane reading in her steady, quiet voice while Dalton listened with rapt attention. It was the most peaceful evening Jane could remember having with another person. The first month passed more quickly than Jane would have thought possible. Dalton's arm healed cleanly, and he threw himself into improving her homestead with an energy that both impressed and slightly overwhelmed her. He rebuilt the chicken coop she had long abandoned, repaired the roof of her cabin where it had been leaking slightly, and helped her bring in enough firewood to last deep into winter. But more than the physical work, it was the companionship that Jane found herself valuing. Having someone to talk to share meals with, to work alongside made the days feel fuller, richer. She caught herself laughing at his jokes, sharing stories she had never told anyone, looking forward to seeing him each morning. On the night that marked exactly 1 month since he had arrived, Dalton brought it up. "Our agreement was for 1 month," he said as they sat by her fireplace, the autumn wind howling outside. "I said you could send me away if you wanted." Jane felt her chest tighten. She had known this conversation was coming but had been dreading it. "Do you want to leave?" she asked instead of answering. "No," Dalton said simply. "I want to stay. I want to help you through the winter and into spring. I want to keep building this place up, making it stronger. I want—" He paused, seeming to struggle for words. "I want to be here with you." "Why?" Jane asked, needing to understand. "You could go to town, find easier work, be around more people." "I do not want easy," Dalton said. "I do not want more people. I want this." He gestured around the cabin at the life they had begun building together. "I want to wake up knowing that my work matters, that I am building something real, and I want—" He hesitated again. "I want to know you better, Jane. Every day I spend with you, I see more things to admire. Your strength, your skill, your kindness even when you pretend you do not have any. I want more time to earn your trust, to show you that not all men are like the one who hurt you." Jane felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I do not want you to go," she admitted quietly. "These last weeks, having you here, it has been good, better than good. I did not realize how lonely I had been until I was not lonely anymore." "Then I will stay," Dalton said, his face breaking into that transformative smile, "as long as you will have me." "There need to be rules," Jane said quickly, needing to establish boundaries even as her heart raced. "You still sleep in the barn. We work as partners, equal say in decisions about the homestead. And if I need time alone, you respect that." "Agreed," Dalton said. "Anything else?" "I need time," Jane said, the words hard to force out. "I am not ready for anything beyond friendship. I do not know if I will ever be ready. If that is not enough for you, tell me now." Dalton met her eyes steadily. "Friendship is more than enough, Jane. I will take whatever you are willing to give and be grateful for it. No expectations, no pressure. We will just keep going day by day and see where it leads." Relief flooded through Jane. "Thank you for understanding." "Thank you for letting me stay," Dalton replied. Winter came on hard that year, snow falling heavy and early. Jane was grateful for all the preparation they had done, for the extra firewood and the supplies they had laid in. They settled into a routine that saw them through the harsh months, maintaining the animals Dalton had traded for in town, keeping the cabin warm, reading aloud to each other during the long evenings. It was during one particularly fierce blizzard, with the wind screaming outside and snow piling high against the cabin walls, that everything changed. They had been reading by firelight, passing a book of Robert Burns' poems back and forth, when the cabin door burst open, blown by a massive gust of wind. Snow swirled in, and Dalton leaped up to fight the door closed again, throwing his weight against the wind. Jane rushed to help him, and together they managed to force the door shut and bar it. They stood there, breathing hard, covered in snow, and suddenly they were laughing. Laughing at the absurdity of fighting a door, at the wildness of the storm, at the simple fact that they were alive and together and warm. Their laughter faded, and Jane became acutely aware of how close they were standing, of Dalton's hand still resting on her arm from where he had steadied her, of the way he was looking at her with something that went far beyond friendship. "Jane," he said softly, "I know you said you needed time, and I respect that. But I need you to know that I have fallen in love with you, completely, wholly, irrevocably in love. I do not expect you to say it back. I just needed to say it out loud at least once." Jane's heart hammered in her chest. Fear and longing warred inside her, 7 years of walls battling against the truth she had been avoiding for weeks now. "I am terrified," she whispered. "Terrified of caring about you, of letting you close, of what it might mean." "I know," Dalton said gently, "and I will wait as long as you need. Forever, if that is what it takes." "What if I cannot give you what you want?" Jane asked, tears pricking her eyes. "What if I am too broken?" "You are not broken," Dalton said fiercely. "You are bent, maybe, changed by what you have endured, but not broken. And I do not want you to be anything other than who you are." Jane felt something crack open inside her chest, all the fear and pain and loneliness of the past 7 years spilling out. She found herself stepping closer to Dalton, her hand reaching up to touch his face with trembling fingers. "I think I love you too," she said, the words barely audible over the wind. "I think I have for a while now. It terrifies me." "Love should not be terrifying," Dalton said, covering her hand with his. "Not real love." "Show me," Jane said. "Show me what it should be like." Dalton leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and kissed her. It was gentle, reverent, asking rather than taking. Jane had never been kissed like that, with such care and tenderness. When they parted, she was crying, years of pain releasing in those tears. "We will go slow," Dalton promised, pulling her into his arms and just holding her while she wept. "As slow as you need. There is no rush, Jane. We have all the time in the world." They stood there for a long time, the storm raging outside while inside, in the warm safety of the cabin, something new and fragile began to bloom. The rest of winter passed in a haze of growing closeness. True to his word, Dalton let Jane set the pace, never pushing, never demanding more than she was ready to give. They held hands while they walked through the snow. They kissed by firelight. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. Jane found herself opening up in ways she had never thought possible, sharing her fears and dreams and the parts of herself she had kept locked away. Dalton listened to all of it, never judging, always accepting. "What do you want from life?" Jane asked him one evening as they sat together, her head resting on his shoulder. "This," Dalton said simply. "A home, a partner, work, that matters. Maybe children someday if that is something you would want, but mostly just this, you and me, building a life together." "I never thought about children," Jane admitted. "After my marriage, I could not imagine bringing a child into the world, could not imagine being anyone's mother." "And now?" Dalton asked carefully. Jane considered the question seriously. "Now, I think maybe I could imagine it. Not right away, but someday. With you." She felt Dalton's smile against her hair. "Someday sounds perfect." As winter began to ease into early spring, Jane realized that she felt safer, more at peace than she had in her entire life. The nightmares that had plagued her for years had faded. The constant vigilance, the fear that someone would find her and drag her back to face justice for killing her husband, had quieted. "I want to marry you," she said one morning as they worked together to tap the maple trees for syrup. Dalton nearly dropped his bucket. "What?" "I want to marry you," Jane repeated, feeling strangely calm about the decision. "Properly, legally if we can manage it. I want to choose you on my own terms." "Jane, are you sure?" Dalton asked, setting down his tools and taking her hands. "Marriage after everything you went through?" "That was not a marriage," Jane said firmly. "That was a prison. This is different. You are different. I am different. And I want to choose to bind my life to yours to build something real and true." "Yes," Dalton said, joy breaking across his face. "Yes, absolutely yes. We can go to town, find a preacher, do it properly." "I need to tell you something first," Jane said, her stomach knotting with fear. "My real name is not really Jane Jennings. I mean, Jane is my real first name, but I took the surname Jennings when I ran. My married name was Harper. If we marry legally, there is a chance someone might make the connection, might realize who I am." "Then we will be careful," Dalton said. "We will go to a town where no one knows either of us, use the name Jennings, start fresh. As far as anyone needs to know, you are a widow who lived alone until I came along." "Are you sure?" Jane asked. "You would be tying yourself to someone who is hiding, who might always have to hide." "I am sure," Dalton said without hesitation. "You are worth any risk, Jane. You are worth everything." They made plans carefully. In late spring, when the trails were clear and travel was easier, they would go to a town 2 days' ride away, a place where neither of them was known. They would marry there and return to their mountain as husband and wife. The intervening weeks were spent in preparation and anticipation. Dalton moved from the barn to the cabin, and Jane discovered that sharing her space with him felt natural, right. They fell into an easy domesticity that filled her with quiet happiness. "I never thought I could have this," she told him one night as they lay together in the darkness, his arms around her. "A home that feels safe, a person I can trust completely." "You deserve this," Dalton said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You deserve everything good, Jane." When the time finally came to make the journey to town, Jane felt nervous but determined. They packed carefully, bringing enough supplies for the trip, and a bit of the gold Jane had been carefully hoarding from her years of trapping and selling furs. The town they chose was called Riverside, a small but growing settlement in southwestern Wyoming. They arrived dusty and tired from traveling, and found lodging at a modest boarding house run by a friendly woman who asked no prying questions. The next day, they found the town's preacher, a kind-faced man named Reverend Matthews, who agreed to marry them that very afternoon. They had no rings, no fancy clothes, no guests. But when Jane spoke her vows, promising to love and honor Dalton Sullivan, she meant every word with a depth of conviction that surprised her. And when Dalton promised to cherish and protect her, to be her partner and friend and love for all his days, she believed him completely. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Matthews said with a warm smile. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Sullivan." Dalton did, tenderly and thoroughly, and Jane felt something settle deep in her soul. She was married again, but this time it was a choice, a celebration, not a prison sentence. They spent one night in Riverside in a hotel room that felt almost decadent after months in their simple cabin. Dalton was patient and gentle, letting Jane lead even though she was nervous and uncertain. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he assured her. "I want to," Jane said. "I want to choose this with you." Their joining was tender and slow, Dalton taking great care to ensure her comfort, her pleasure. It was nothing like Jane's previous experience of the marriage bed, which had been brutal and painful. This was about connection, about two people choosing to be vulnerable with each other, about love. Afterward, lying in Dalton's arms, Jane felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Did I hurt you?" Dalton asked immediately, concern in his voice. "No," Jane said, smiling through her tears. "The opposite. I am crying because I am happy, because I finally understand what it is supposed to be like." Dalton held her close, and Jane felt, perhaps for the first time in her life, truly safe. They returned to their mountain as husband and wife, and settled into their life with renewed purpose. The cabin felt more like a home now, filled with small touches that spoke of two lives intertwining. Dalton built Jane a proper bookshelf for her growing collection of books. Jane made curtains from cloth they had bought in town, softening the cabin's interior. As summer came on, they worked together to expand the garden, to improve the barn, to make the homestead more productive. They talked about the future, about maybe getting a milk cow, about planting an orchard that would take years to bear fruit but would be worth the wait. "What are you thinking about?" Dalton asked one evening as they sat on the porch he had built, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. "How happy I am," Jane said simply. "How strange it is to feel this content." "Strange good or strange bad?" Dalton asked with a smile. "Strange wonderful," Jane said, taking his hand. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for this to be taken away." "Nothing is going to take this away," Dalton said firmly. "We have built this together and we will protect it together." But life on the frontier was never entirely predictable. Late that summer, a marshal came through the area, asking questions about an old wanted poster for a woman who had killed her husband back east. Jane's blood ran cold when she heard about it from a trapper who passed through. "He is in Monticello now," the trapper said, accepting the coffee Jane offered with shaking hands, asking if anyone has seen a woman matching this description. He pulled out a worn paper from his pack. Jane looked at the poster and felt her heart stop. It was her, or a decent enough approximation. Dark hair, medium height, a scar on her left hand where her husband had once cut her. The poster was old, at least 7 years, but it was unmistakably her. After the trapper left, Jane showed Dalton the poster with trembling hands. "He is going to find me," she said, panic rising. "All these years I thought maybe they had given up, but someone is still looking." "Listen to me," Dalton said, gripping her shoulders gently. "You are Jane Sullivan now. You are a married woman living on a mountain homestead. That woman on the poster, Jane Harper, she does not exist anymore." "But what if someone recognizes me?" Jane asked. "What if they turn me in?" "Who is going to recognize you?" Dalton asked reasonably. "You have been here 7 years. The nearest town is 20 miles away and you rarely go there. The few people who have met you know you as Jane Jennings, the woman who lived alone on the mountain. No one knows about your past except me, and I will never tell." "But the marshal will find nothing," Dalton said firmly, "because there is nothing to find." "You are not that scared girl anymore, Jane. You are a strong woman with a husband and a home and a life. We will weather this like we weather everything else, together." Jane wanted to believe him, but fear had sunk its claws deep. For the next several weeks, she jumped at every sound, watched the trails constantly, kept her rifle close at hand. The marshal did come to their homestead eventually, riding up one afternoon with questions in his eyes. Jane's heart hammered as she and Dalton met him in the yard. "Afternoon," the marshal said, tipping his hat. He was an older man, weathered and tired-looking. "Name is Marshal Pike. I am looking into an old case, wondered if you folks might be able to help." "We will try," Dalton said calmly, his hand finding Jane's and squeezing reassuringly. Marshal Pike pulled out the wanted poster. "Looking for this woman. She killed her husband back in Missouri about 7 years ago. I have been tracking leads, heard there was a woman living alone up in these mountains for a good while. Thought maybe there might be a connection." "That would be my wife," Dalton said before Jane could speak. "She did live alone for some years before we met and married, but as you can see, she is clearly not the woman on that poster." The marshal looked between the poster and Jane. Jane forced herself to meet his eyes steadily, even though terror screamed through her veins. "Hard to say," the marshal said slowly. "Some similarities, maybe, but this poster is old. How long you been married, if you do not mind my asking?" "Nearly 6 months, Dalton said. "Met last fall when I was passing through. Decided to stay." "And before that, Mrs. Sullivan?" the marshal asked Jane directly. "I came to these mountains after my first husband died," Jane said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Needed solitude to grieve. I lived alone for several years until Mr. Sullivan here convinced me that life was better shared." It was not entirely a lie, Jane told herself. Her first husband was dead. She had needed solitude. She had grieved, if not for him, then for the life she could have had. The marshal studied her for a long moment, and Jane felt certain he could see right through her, could see the guilt and fear. But finally, he folded up the poster and tucked it away. "Well, I apologize for bothering you folks," he said. "It was a long shot anyway. Woman I am looking for would likely be using a different name, would not be settled down and married. But I had to check, you understand." "Of course," Dalton said. "Can we offer you some coffee before you head back down?" "Appreciate it, but I should be moving on," the marshal said, climbing back onto his horse. "Lots of ground to cover still." They watched him ride away, Jane barely breathing until he disappeared from sight. Then her legs gave out and she sank to the ground, shaking. "He knew," she gasped. "He knew and he let me go." "Maybe he knew," Dalton said, kneeling beside her, "or maybe he genuinely could not be sure. Either way, he is gone now, you are safe." "What if he comes back?" Jane asked. "What if he changes his mind?" "Then we will deal with it," Dalton said. "But I do not think he will." He looked tired, Jane, tired of chasing ghosts. "I think he wants to believe you are just what you said, a widow who remarried and built a new life." Jane wanted to believe that, needed to believe it. As the days passed and the marshal did not return, she slowly began to relax again. Perhaps Dalton was right. Perhaps the past was finally willing to let her go. That fall, Jane realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex tangle of emotions. Joy, terror, wonder, and fear all mixed together. She told Dalton one evening as they prepared dinner together. "I am going to have a baby," she said, the words feeling surreal even as she spoke them. Dalton dropped the knife he was using to cut vegetables, spinning to face her. "A baby? Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor," Jane said. "All the signs are there. I would guess I am about 3 months along." Dalton crossed the space between them in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. "This is wonderful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Jane asked, needing to hear it. "I am thrilled," Dalton said. "Scared too, but mostly thrilled. We are going to have a family, Jane, a real family." Jane felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I am terrified," she admitted. "What if I am a terrible mother? What if I cannot do this?" "You will be an amazing mother," Dalton said firmly. "Look at everything you have survived, everything you have built. A child will be lucky to have you raising them." As her pregnancy progressed through the winter, Jane found herself believing Dalton's words more and more. They prepared carefully, gathering supplies for the birth, reading everything they could find about childbirth and infant care. Dalton built a beautiful cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving small flowers into the headboard. "For our little one," he said, presenting it to Jane with shy pride. Jane ran her fingers over the carvings, marveling at the skill and care evident in every detail. "It is perfect," she said softly. The baby came in early spring, arriving during a warm spell that made the world outside the cabin smell of new growth and possibility. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Jane was certain she would not survive it. But Dalton stayed beside her the entire time, holding her hand, encouraging her, never showing his own fear. When their son finally entered the world, wailing his displeasure at being born, Jane felt a love so fierce and immediate that it stole her breath. This tiny, perfect person was hers. Hers and Dalton's, created from their love, untainted by the darkness of her past. "He is beautiful," Dalton said, tears streaming down his face as he held his son for the first time. "Absolutely beautiful. What should we name him?" "I was thinking Matthew," Jane said, watching her husband and son with overwhelming tenderness. "After your father." Dalton looked at her with such love and gratitude that Jane felt her heart might burst. "Matthew Sullivan," he said softly. "It is perfect." The months after Matthew's birth were exhausting and joyful in equal measure. Jane discovered reserves of patience and strength she had not known she possessed. Dalton proved to be a devoted father, taking on more than his share of the endless work that came with a new baby, so that Jane could rest and recover. On particularly difficult nights, when Matthew would not settle and they were both exhausted beyond measure, they would take turns walking with him, singing soft songs and murmuring reassurances. On one such night, as dawn began to break and Matthew finally fell asleep in Dalton's arms, Jane felt a sense of rightness settle over her. "This is what I was meant for," she said quietly. "This family, this life." "I am glad you found it," Dalton said, carefully laying Matthew in his cradle. "I am glad you found us. I am glad you refused to leave," Jane replied. "I am glad you saw something in me worth staying for." "I saw everything worth staying for," Dalton said, pulling her close. "I still do every single day." As Matthew grew from infant to toddler, the homestead grew too. Dalton built an addition onto the cabin, giving them more space. They acquired more animals, built better fences, planted the orchard they had dreamed of. Other families began settling in the area, and while Jane was wary at first, she gradually learned to accept their presence, even to appreciate it. She became known as someone skilled with healing, and neighbors would occasionally come seeking her help with injuries or illnesses. She never turned anyone away, though she remained guarded about her past. As far as anyone knew, she was simply Jane Sullivan, wife of Dalton, mother of Matthew, a woman who had lived in these mountains for years and helped them thrive. When Matthew was 3, Jane became pregnant again. This time, the fear was less and the joy more immediate. She knew what to expect now, knew that she could survive it, knew that the reward was worth the struggle. Their daughter was born on a bright summer day, coming into the world more easily than her brother had. Dalton suggested naming her Julia after Jane's mother, and Jane wept at the gesture. "You remembered," she said, holding her newborn daughter close. "I remember everything you tell me," Dalton said, kissing her forehead. "Your mother deserves to be remembered, honored." This seems like a fitting way. With 2 children, the homestead became even livelier. Matthew proved to be a curious, energetic boy who loved helping his father with the animals and asking endless questions about everything. Julia was quieter, more contemplative, but with a stubborn streak that reminded Jane of herself. As the years passed, Jane sometimes thought about the girl she had been, the terrified woman who had killed her husband and fled into these mountains with nothing but fear and desperation driving her. That person felt like a stranger now, someone from another life entirely. She was Jane Sullivan now, truly and completely. Mother, wife, healer, homesteader. She had built a life so far removed from her traumatic past that sometimes she could go days without thinking about it. The marshal never returned. Whatever investigation he had been conducting seemed to have ended, and as more years passed, Jane allowed herself to believe that she truly was safe, that the past had finally released its hold on her. When Matthew was 10 and Julia was 7, a letter arrived. It was from a lawyer in Missouri, addressed to anyone who might know the whereabouts of Jane Harper. The neighbor who brought it up the mountain handed it to Dalton with a curious look. "Someone looking for a Jane Harper," he said. "Postmaster thought maybe you might know something, since your wife's name is Jane and she came from back east somewhere." "I will look into it," Dalton said calmly, thanking the neighbor for bringing it up. After the neighbor left, Dalton and Jane sat together on their porch, the letter between them like a coiled snake. It took Jane several minutes to work up the courage to open it. Inside, the letter was brief and to the point. Jane Harper's father had died. Before his death, he had made inquiries about his daughter, expressing regret for forcing her into marriage, for not protecting her. He had left what small estate he had to her, if she could be found. The lawyer handling the matter asked that if anyone knew Jane Harper's whereabouts, they contact him immediately. Jane read the letter 3 times, emotions swirling. Her father was dead, had apparently regretted what he had done to her, had tried to make amends in the only way he could. "What do you want to do?" Dalton asked gently. "I do not know," Jane admitted. "Part of me wants to respond to claim what is mine, but doing so would mean revealing myself, would mean taking the risk that someone might still want to prosecute me. The statute of limitations on most crimes is about 7 years, Dalton said carefully. It has been over 15 years now since your husband died. Even if you revealed yourself, I am not sure they could legally prosecute you." "Could we be certain of that?" Jane asked. "We could write to a lawyer, ask hypothetically about the situation," Dalton suggested. "Without giving names or specific details. See what they say." They did exactly that, composing a carefully worded letter about a hypothetical situation involving self-defense against an abusive husband. The response, when it came months later, was encouraging. After 15 years with no active investigation and the death occurring in what could be argued as self-defense, prosecution was highly unlikely. With that knowledge, Jane finally wrote to the lawyer handling her father's estate. She explained that she was Jane Harper, now Jane Sullivan, that she had fled an abusive marriage years ago and built a new life. She asked about the estate and about any messages her father might have left. The lawyer's response was sympathetic. He sent a banknote for the modest sum her father had left, along with a letter her father had written before he died. In shaking hands, Jane read her father's words. He apologized over and over for failing her as a father. He expressed his understanding if she never wanted to forgive him, but begged that she know he had realized his mistakes and had spent his final years trying to atone by helping other young women in difficult situations. "He was trying to be better," Jane said to Dalton, tears streaming down her face. "Too late for me, but he was trying." "That matters," Dalton said, holding her as she cried. "Not as much as him being better when you needed him to be, but it still matters." Jane decided to use the money from her father's estate to help the homestead, but also to set aside some for their children's futures. It felt right, somehow, to take something painful from her past and transform it into something that would benefit Matthew and Julia. As the children grew older, Jane told them, in age-appropriate ways, about her past. She wanted them to understand that people could survive terrible things and build beautiful lives afterward. She wanted them to know that strength and kindness were not opposing qualities, but could exist together in the same person. Matthew grew into a thoughtful young man who loved the mountains as much as his parents did. He talked about staying on the homestead, about building his own cabin nearby when he was grown. Julia, meanwhile, had inherited her mother's love of books and her father's gift with words. She talked about becoming a teacher, about helping other children learn. "Whatever you choose, we will support you," Jane told her children. "Your lives are your own to build." On their 20th wedding anniversary, Dalton surprised Jane by taking her to the spot where they had buried his horse Maple all those years ago. Someone, probably Dalton, had been maintaining the grave, keeping it clear of debris. "This is where it all started," Dalton said, taking her hand. "This is where I lost my old life and found my new one." "I was so afraid of you staying," Jane admitted, "so certain it would end badly." "I knew from the moment I saw you that you were extraordinary," Dalton said. "A woman alone on a mountain, surviving and thriving on nothing but her own skill and will. I knew if you gave me a chance, if you let me prove myself, we could build something amazing together." "You were right," Jane said, leaning against him. "We built something better than I ever dreamed possible." They stood there for a long time, looking out over the mountains they called home. The homestead below was thriving, the children were healthy and happy, and their love had only deepened over the years. "You ever regret it?" Dalton asked. "Letting me stay?" "Never," Jane said firmly. "Not once, not even for a moment. You are the best decision I ever made." "You are the best decision I ever made too," Dalton said. "The best life I could have imagined." As they walked back to the cabin together, Jane thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain and fear and desperate flight that had led her to these mountains. The years of solitude and survival. And then Dalton, refusing to leave her behind, refusing to accept that she was meant to be alone. She had been a girl forced into a nightmare marriage, a young woman who had killed to survive, a fugitive hiding in the mountains. And now she was simply Jane Sullivan, wife, mother, healer, friend. The past would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growing children. Matthew eventually did build his own cabin on the homestead, bringing home a young woman named Sarah, whom he had met in town and fallen deeply in love with. They married and began their own family, giving Jane and Dalton grandchildren who filled the homestead with laughter and chaos. Julia pursued her dream of teaching, but closer to home than originally planned. She helped establish a small school in the growing community, teaching the children of settlers who continued to move into the area. She too married, to a quiet man named Thomas who worked as a carpenter and built her a beautiful library room in their home. Jane watched her children build their lives and felt a profound sense of peace. She had given them what she never had: the freedom to choose, the knowledge that they were loved, the confidence that came from growing up safe and valued. On a warm spring evening, when Jane was in her mid-50s and Dalton approaching 60, they sat on their porch watching the sunset. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, supervised by their parents. The sounds of family, of life and love and laughter, filled the air. "Did you ever imagine this?" Jane asked Dalton, gesturing to the scene before them. "When you first came to this mountain, did you imagine all of this?" "I imagined possibility," Dalton said, taking her hand in his as he had done countless times over the years. "I imagined that if you gave me a chance, we might build something good, but this exceeded my wildest dreams." "Mine too," Jane said softly. "I thought I would die alone on this mountain. I thought solitude was the price of survival." "Instead you lived," Dalton said. "We lived together and we built this whole beautiful world. Jane rested her head on his shoulder, watching the mountains turn gold in the fading light. The same mountains that had sheltered her when she had nowhere else to go. The same mountains that had brought Dalton to her door. The same mountains that now cradled their entire family. She thought about the scared young woman who had arrived here with nothing but a dead man's blood on her hands and terror in her heart. She thought about the choice she had made to let Dalton stay, to take the terrifying risk of trusting another person. She thought about every hard decision, every moment of fear overcome, every small act of courage that had led to this moment. "I love you," she said to Dalton, the words as true now as they had been the first time she had spoken them. "Thank you for refusing to leave me behind." "I love you too," Dalton replied. "Thank you for letting me stay." As the sun set fully and stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Jane felt a completeness that she had spent most of her life believing was impossible. She had survived. She had healed. She had loved and been loved in return. She had built a family, a home, a legacy that would outlast her. The mountain woman who had lived alone for years had found something better than solitude. She had found partnership, had found love, had found a traveling cowboy who had seen past her walls and her fear to the person she could become, if only she would let herself try. And she had tried. God, how she had tried. And in trying, in choosing hope over fear, love over isolation, she had found a life more beautiful than any she could have imagined during those long, lonely years. The journey had been long and often difficult. But looking around at her family, at the life they had built together, Jane knew with absolute certainty that every step had been worth it. Every moment of fear overcome, every wall carefully dismantled, every risk taken in the name of love had led her here. To this porch, with this man, surrounded by this family, on this mountain that had been both her refuge and her salvation. She was home. Truly, finally, completely home. And she was no longer alone, nor would she ever be again.